Hi everybody, it's Andy and welcome again to my office in Modesto, California. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in California as well as New York. In this video, I'm going to go over the idea of a case management conference in California State Superior Court, specifically civil cases. So all of those kind of conditions and disqualifiers that I put at the end there, they are important because if you have a criminal case, for example, this video does not apply to you. If you are dealing with an appeal situation of any kind, does not apply to you. If you are dealing with federal court in any way, this video does not apply to you either. So that might sound like a lot of conditions and a lot of exclusions. It's actually not that big a deal, I think, because most kind of typical, average, run-of-the-mill members of the public, when they file cases at all, it is going to be in state superior court, and that basically is not covered by any of the exclusions that I've mentioned. So if you are outside of California, for example, Superior Court in California is the court where, like I said, the average person files all their cases. So if it's a divorce, a probate, guardianship, you're adopting a child, if you have a contract that you've signed with somebody and they're not paying you, that's where you would file the case. If you saw a doctor and the doctor screwed up and injured you, medical malpractice, State Superior Court. So a lot of cases are filed in State Superior Court. Small claims in California, small claims court is part of Superior Court, so when I talk about filing cases in Superior Court, civil cases, I'm including small claims in that also. So if you are a lawyer, I'll describe State Superior Court like this. It is the state trial court in California of general jurisdiction. If you're not a lawyer, don't worry if you don't know what that means, but if you are a lawyer, hopefully you remember your civil procedure well enough to know what state trial court of general jurisdiction is. So anyway, all of that said, imagine a case management conference like this. The courts, not just in California, but the courts generally, are going to have new cases filed every day. Like every day, for lack of a better word, every day somewhere somebody's getting into trouble or disagreements are happening. New cases arise every day. And I don't know if any of you have ever thought about it, but the thing is, cases generally will finish at a slower rate than which they're filed. So in other words, more cases are filed than finished per day. So it's kind of like that. So because of this, there is going to be an ever-increasing kind of mound of cases that the courts are going to be managing. So chaos, it should be fairly obvious, I think, that chaos and total disarray would result if there was no system, if there was no protocol or procedure or something to manage this ever-growing mound of cases. So that intuition is correct. And the protocol, the procedure, the system that the courts use, the case management conference is basically one important component of that. So all of that said, a case management conference basically can be summarized in one word: update. So with the case management conference, what you are basically doing is updating the court, updating the judge about how your particular case is going. So if you are representing yourself, this burden unfortunately falls on you. If you are represented by a lawyer, hopefully your lawyer will be able to take care of this for you. Don't count on it though. So the thing is, if you are in limited scope representation kind of situation, make sure that case management conference case management conferences rather, are part of what the lawyer is doing for you. If you don't know what a limited scope representation is, I have a video on that, which I'll link right over here. So basically, a case management conference then is a tool by which you update the court, update the judge on how your case is going. And the general expectation that I've seen, kind of having done countless case management conferences, is basically that the judge will want to see that you have made some progress. If you show up and say, "Judge, I have done nothing on my case at all, I've sat on my hands for 4 months," generally not a good idea. Generally, the judge will come down on you fairly hard. So 4 to 6 months, for example, basically in terms of timing, once you file the case, I personally would expect to have an update hearing or case management conference hearing roughly 4 to 6 months after the case is filed. Obviously, that varies depending on the county, the judge, the type of case, budget, all that stuff. But 4 to 6 months is my kind of rule of thumb about when I have to go to an update hearing for cases of mine. So that said, I guess one important part of a case management conference that I think a lot of people, regular lay people representing themselves, will forget, and actually lawyers, to be honest with you, will forget about this also, is to file a case management conference statement. Now, a case management conference statement, that terminology can be used specifically or generically. There is actually a document called a case management conference statement. The blank version is a judicial counsel form in California. It's form CM-110. Write it up right over here. I have a video that goes over how to get blank judicial counsel forms. I'll link it kind of up here. So go ahead and download the CM-110 if that's not something that you've done and that you need to do. So there is a specific case management conference statement, like an actual document called that, that you need to file before you go to a case management conference. There's also the idea of updating the judge in writing before you go to the hearing. There's another thing called a status conference questionnaire or status conference statement. It is the same kind of idea, like you're basically filling it out to update the judge on what's going on. The terminology sometimes is used kind of sloppily. Case management conferences, there's a state level form for that. Status conference questionnaires or status conference statements, when I've seen them, generally have been local forms. So I have another video, actually two of them, on what local forms are, how to get them, etc. Go ahead and link it over here. So go ahead and take a look at that if you if the terminology you're hearing is status conference. If that's what you're hearing, go ahead and watch that. Hopefully that'll help you. So, but the basic idea, regardless of what it's called, case management, status, something else entirely even, the basic idea is that there is a type of hearing where you basically go and you update the judge on what the case, like what's been done, how the case is progressing. Generally that's going to be several months after the case is filed, but that's going to depend on what your local rules say. So if you're not familiar with local rules, I have another video on that, which I'm going to link down in the bottom here, and you should go ahead and check that out because local rules are going to be very important. And for case management conference statements in particular, they're going to be very important because they specify how soon before the court hearing you have to file your statement. So the rule of thumb that I generally go by is something like 15 days. Some counties that I appear in will have a 15-day local rule. Some counties that I appear in have a 10-day local rule. So if I assume 15, I'm covered both ways. Yeah. So anyway, hopefully all of that was helpful. A case management conference statement, the takeaway is that it's an update hearing. Generally, it's going to be fairly short unless your particular case has a big problem in it of some kind. A lot of times people will think that, oh, the case management conference, we can finish the case then. Very impossible, but very, very rare. A lot of times people will also, clients and people that I see in court basically will stress out about the case management conference case management conference also. They'll think, oh my God, I'm going to court, I need to prepare, I need to take the day off work, etc. It's generally not that, it's unnecessary to worry about it to that degree, I think. Unless your case has a humongous problem in it, the case management conference is going to be something fairly routine. It's something that hopefully should not take more than a few minutes, so don't stress out about it. Other types of hearings are more involved, and if you have to stress out about those, but case management conferences generally are not terribly complicated. So anyway, hopefully that helped. I run into people who don't know what case management generally is and what a case management conference is. They think court, and like I said, they stress out about it or they forget to go or something. So all of those are bad things. So basically, hopefully this video helps you kind of, basically enlightens you, I guess, on what a case management conference is, what it's about, the work involved, etc. So anyway, as I always say, which I guess based on some of the comments I've gotten, I don't do terribly well. I tried not to make that too confusing, but the law sometimes does not lend itself to extreme simplicity. But yeah, go ahead and rewind, subscribe, leave me a comment, all of that nice stuff, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks.